Hello, everyone, and welcome.
Yep.
I'm Sheila Bonini. I'm the Senior Vice President of Private Sector Engagement with World Wildlife Fund. And I'm really pleased to be here and welcome you all to this session, How Leaders and Policymakers Can Turn the Tide on Plastic Pollution. So I want to thank Unilever first for sponsoring this event on behalf of the Business Coalition for a Global Plastic Treaty. I also want to send regrets from my colleagues at Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are going to co-lead this event together with WWF, but we had a badge mix-up, so they're not here, but they are co-leading and co-convening the Business Coalition for a global plastic treaty. So the Business Coalition has been giving voice to nearly 200 businesses across the value chain, finance institutions and NGO partners. Together with EMF, we've been co-convening since 2019, and we are asking for an ambitious treaty to end plastic pollution. The private sector will play a really important role in implementing the solution that we need, but business needs regulatory certainty. So it's imperative that the final treaty contains strong, legally binding provisions that require national governments to implement and enforce harmonized regulations over the full life cycle of plastics. With clear global rules to help level the playing field, businesses can work on the transformation of the plastics value chain that we need, and the treaty will also help enable and unlock needed private investment. I want to remind us of two key aspects outlined as the mandate for the treaty in the negotiations in UNEA, Resolution 514, which was negotiated almost 2 years ago, which was set, the resolution, almost 2 years ago in Nairobi. It decided that the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, or INC, would develop an international, legally binding instrument on plastic pollution that, one, addresses the full life cycle of plastics and includes provisions to promote sustainable production and consumption of plastics. Now, after 3 rounds of negotiations in the INC, it is necessary for us to both reinstate the political ambition of the UNEA resolution and to advance the technical discussions on core issues. We're running out of time. If governments are to meet the 2024, the end of 2024 deadline to conclude the multilateral discussions, at INC4 in April in Canada, negotiators have to cut through what is a 70-page revised draft treaty document that contains a confusing variety of options and alternatives for each potential provision, from super ambitious to nothing at all. So given this lack of and there's a lack of a final decision in INC3 regarding what happens in intersessional from that INC to the one in April. And so any work that we need to advance the technical discussions, what's really needed if you have this wide array of potential outcomes, have to happen informally, while enhancing a common understanding for why those provisions are needed. So we need ambitious governments and observers to be clear and focused on what's important in this next step of negotiations to avoid ending up with a watered-down treaty or setting a low bar. Our session today is meant to support a dialogue around how we can move this forward and get an ambitious treaty. So to kick things off, I'm pleased to welcome Elena Laurent. So if you want to come up.
Thank you. That's very good. Are we going to sit? Too much? Should I sit now?
Yeah, you can sit.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
So before joining Consumers International, Elena was a member of the executive committee of WEF, where she led their work on membership, government engagement, and business development, as well as global initiatives on agriculture and the future of manufacturing. Before WEF, she worked at McKinsey, where I also spent a good part of my career, and Tesco. So I'll start, Helen. Today's session will explore how the treaty negotiation can prepare the grounds to shape a new plastic system. Why is plastic pollution an important issue to tackle from a consumer point of view?
Perfect. So first, thank you. I think I'm a last-minute fill-in, so I will try and do justice as a fire starter or a seed planter to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who do such amazing work. Hopefully, give me a. This was 10 months ago, but do be careful on the ice, okay? And it just, I hope, shows the level of passion and dedication that we have as Consumers International to this issue. And certainly I'm here in a learning mode as much as anything else. I always hate that sort of fire starter thing. We're learning, right? Let me start with a little bit about the organization I'm with, because it'll sort of give you a sense of the opportunity and where we're coming from. Consumers International, you may never have heard of it, but you'll have heard of our members. Choice in Australia, Which in the UK, Consumer Reports in the US, FNAC in Morocco, Adacor in Rwanda. I could go on. 100 countries around the world have consumer advocates, and they think differently. Now, when you come from coming from the business world, I was like, I get it. I know how to think about consumers. This, yes, and this is a group that thinks about the independent person in the marketplace and what are our aspirations for the future. We think about access, economic choice, safety, the protection of vulnerable consumers, redress. And those are things, when we see the sort of discussions about trust, those are things that are getting undermined and which we need to build back. Now, why does plastics fit into this? So when I started out in 2019 in this role, I got my new council together, 20 members from across the world, and I said, tell me about your marketplace. Classic, probably McKinsey sort of, are we live streamed? Wonderful, wonderful way of thinking about things. Tell me about your marketplace. What happened? They showed me videos of waste, of plastics in their marketplaces. Okay, so coming from this was an issue that brought people together. Skip forward 2 years, in the heart of the pandemic, we ask our members what they would like to focus on for World Consumer Rights Day, which is this incredible thing that actually brings together people from all over the world. Heart of the pandemic, they said tackling plastic pollution. 80 countries joined in a campaign funded with nothing, but galvanizing around the 7 R's, right? So multiple ways in which we can tackle this. This is a systemic issue, and it's obvious to people that it is a systemic issue. Cut forward now, India, Brazil, our members there, are representing us and representing the global group in this treaty, and we saw it as a beacon of hope. A beacon. I don't like the lighthouse. You stay away from lighthouses, right? I think I was involved in the start of that, but beacon. We need to move towards this beacon. And we were so excited that it presents a new future for safety, right? This is, even within that framework of economic choice and all the rest of it, the safety element is where all of our thinking about ESG, all of that, it's safety. Our marketplace is not yet safe for us with our new understanding. And so this treaty presented a way in which we could work towards consumer care, value, safety for people everywhere, and not spend time sort of shouting at each other about how we get there, or sort of one shampoo bottle at a time trying to make that change happen. Now, seeing the treaty stalling, to my understanding, but again I would love to learn, is a huge missed opportunity. It is a waste of time. We will spend as consumer advocates, we will shout at businesses for not moving forward with your labeling. We will shout at governments about not finding the right livelihoods and standards. We can do that. Of course, there are market solutions, but how important is it now to use this to move towards the beacon together and accelerate? And back to the theme of this meeting, build trust and build hope. So that's how we sort of see the plastics. It just sits at the heart of our bigger aspirations for the marketplace as people in the marketplace.
Really, really helpful. I'm curious, just wondering, as you think about the process and the treaty process, and we've seen successes in the past, like with the ozone or with mercury pollution, what do you think it'll take to replicate that kind of success here?
Honestly, I think it's courage. I think there is something about leaders knowing that this will, I could tell you about a series of sort of technical or market changes, specific points along the value chain. At the end of the day, this is doable, right? Those changes feel doable. Businesses know how to design brilliantly. We know how to create new business models that will work. Unless the fundamentals change, those aren't possible. So for me, it's stepping forward and having courage to find perhaps an incomplete solution together, but one that we can work and have enough of a flywheel. So from our perspective, it's how do we give that sort of almost political certainty that this is something that can move forward. And that's where I would actually ask for information, transparency, information inclusion, because then with our network and with, we are a tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle alongside so many amazing NGOs and organizations that are in this journey together. But having the information and the transparency to be able to bring everyone with us, that would be incredibly helpful.
Well, I think that answers my question I was going to ask you, which is, in the process itself is going to be member-led, right? Yeah. But there's clearly a role for businesses and civil society. And I was going to say, in order to make sure we get to this ambitious treaty, what can we do as NGOs, as businesses? And just, that's part of the answer, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we are an observer in some of these. It's incredibly difficult to be part of those processes effectively. I think there are ways in which we can do a better job and which we can make those connections. I dream of the day when we can bring consumer advocates in a group in the same way as perhaps businesses do to some of these. Honestly, it would be so exciting. It would be such a rich conversation. Sustainable consumption, in my humble opinion, does not get the level of coverage that it could do, and we do need those two things to come together. If that's enough for your fire starting,
that's terrific. Well, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
And especially for stepping in short notice. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to give you a minute to get down, and then we're going to pull the panel up.
Yeah, just don't watch. Thank you so much, and all power.
So I want to just quickly, before we start our panel discussion, ask you a question. Given what you all know about the problem of plastics, do you think the current state of the treaty negotiations are going to give us what we need to solve the plastic pollution problem? Anybody who thinks that's the case, please raise your hand. Very good. I think what you're saying is that business as usual isn't going to solve the problem, and we really need to make a concerted effort. And I think that's what this session's about. So I'm going to invite up our panelists. So first, Dr. Jeanne d'Arc Mujawamaria. You're welcome. I'm going to give you a space so you can quickly leave. So I know she's going to need to leave a little bit early, so don't read anything into it if she gets up and leaves. So she's the Minister, of the Environment for Rwanda. And prior to her appointment, she served as the ambassador of Rwanda in Russia. She also served as Rwanda's Minister of Gender and Family Promotion, Minister of Education, among other positions. And Minister Mujawamaria holds a PhD in physical chemistry from the Indian Institute of Technology. She is passionate about environmental conservation and sustainable development and green growth for Rwanda. So welcome.
Thank you.
And next, I want to invite Hein Schumacher, who's the CEO of Unilever.
Where you want me.
Oh, yeah, anywhere you want. Hein began his career at Unilever. He was previously the CEO of the Dutch dairy cooperative Friesland Campina. And before he worked for Heinz and was based in China for several years. And Unilever is one of the 4 co-chairs of the Policy Working Group and of the most active supporters of the Business Coalition for Global Plastic Treaty since the beginning. Thank you for your leadership. Next, I want to invite up Kirsten Scout, Director General of WWF International. Say hi, Kirsten. Want to join me? Yes, okay.
Thank you.
And Kirsten is a lifelong conservationist and vocal advocate for nature, who first began her association with WWF as a youth volunteer ranger. Kirsten has been with WWF for almost 20 years, where she has led, where she did various international conservation positions, and she led transformational programs for inclusive conservation and climate justice, progressive digital reform, and played a key part in enabling effective global conservation impact. And prior to WWF, Kirsten lived in Kenya and Malawi, conducting field research and with local communities. So now I'm going to go into the panel discussion. Dr. Jeanne d'Arc, I'm going to start with you. We have seen limited progress at both INC2 and INC3, and we're running out of time, as you know. And we need to get to a meaningful agreement by the end of 2024. So how can governments unlock the current negotiation stalemate without settling for a low ambition?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague panelists. It is a pleasure for me to join this panel discussing about the world crisis of plastic pollution. We all agree that plastic in the environment is a crisis. And for us, we have to make sure the INC is back on track as governments, as private sector, civil society. And of course, governments, especially my government, is aware that for us to end plastic pollution in environment, we have to close the tap. The plastic tap is still on. We have to make sure we off it. So it is crucial to recognize the imperative need to prompt response to the issue of plastic pollution. Human beings are suffering. The environment is suffering. Our biodiversity is disappearing. It is essential to construct a sustainable economy that prioritizes both human health and environment. Government needs to understand that we have to reduce from the origin, from the production side, and address this plastic pollution. You may not end pollution when the plastic tap is still open. And of course, we are not against plastic, because even the can has plastic on it. So we are against plastic waste in environment. I agree with my friend Inga Anderson. We are not against plastic, because even in our cars' chairs, there is plastic. Her can has plastic. Our shoes has plastic. What we don't really need for our environment, for our biodiversity, for our human being is plastic waste into our environment. So INC session is an opportunity to unite the global community in seeking solutions to the urgent global plastic pollution. Rather than avoiding it, we are inviting people to join, to be high ambitious, to join the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution in our nature. Otherwise, we will have more plastic waste than fish, plastic waste than water, because our biodiversity is disappearing due to plastic waste. So government need to start incentivizing plastic-free society and related alternatives. These can increase readiness and ambition for a critical mass to support the INC process. INC process needs the support of all of us. It is not a UNEP process. It is all humankind process. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, I want to turn to you, Heine. What issues are businesses like Unilever facing in efforts to address plastic pollution? And from your perspective, what needs to happen to move things forward?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you, by the way, for your very passionate plea. I traveled through Rwanda a while ago, and I think the way you have approached it, by the way, is definitely a model for many other countries. So thank you for spearheading all of that.
Thank you.
Look, why it's important. I think you said it. It's front of mind for many consumers. We are, of course, a packaged consumer company, so it is super important for us. What some people forget, our goals are very much intertwined. So when we chase our climate goals of greenhouse gas emission reduction, we will never make them if we don't solve the plastic issue and the reduction as well. We would miss out more than 10% of our climate goals if we don't solve the plastics issue. So they're very, very closely related. But what is the cost, or what is the issue? I think it's sort of, I just want to give you three perspectives. Number one, what we've seen with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is when companies move forward and sign pledges and be held accountable in a soft way, we are making progress. The companies who signed it, they are making more progress than companies who didn't. So that's good. But voluntary action alone is not enough, because with voluntary action alone, there will always be leaders and there will be laggards. And it's important, I think, that we create a level playing field. So that's, for me, number one. The number two is the fragmentation in the cycle. So think of different design standards for plastics. Think of the impacts that has on the life cycle of plastics, on the ability to recycle and to avoid landfill. If we can't agree on that, it means a giant complexity. And that's something that's very hard for businesses to work through. Even in Europe, I'm from the Netherlands, and I vividly remember making solutions that work in the system for the Netherlands do not work for the system in Germany. That is crazy. We need to end that very quick, and we need governmental alignment. I think the number three is of course on costs. I mean, look, we are a commercial company. We do want that cost reduction to take place, and if the fragmentation remains, if we're sort of competing on it with others, we're simply not going to win. So I think these are some of the issues that we're facing. We champion the coalition, the business coalition. I think that's an important vehicle, obviously, with yourselves in there as well. And we want to be there for governments to give all the right inputs for everything that businesses can do. But we need the INC process to progress. It is progressing, from what I'm hearing. I'm looking forward to INC 4 in Ottawa, but I have to say a bit more speed is required.
Yes.
Look, I understand the draft. It was issued in December. Intercessions now taking place. But this is, in correlation with climate, the biggest issue we're facing. And the fact that we're here with a very small group, I cannot emphasize enough how incredibly important it is. So I need more pressure.
That's terrific. I think we completely agree, and thank you again for the leadership in the coalition. It's terrific. I want to turn to you, Kirsten, now. As one of many civil society organizations involved in the negotiations, WWF has advocated for the critical role of global rules, similar to what we just heard from Heine. How can we ensure that in an effort to find common ground, we don't end up with something that really doesn't solve the plastic pollution problem?
Thank you, Sheila. I think the Global Plastics Treaty has been absolutely essential for WWF over the past time period. It's been one of our priorities for many other reasons, why everybody else is here. I think without a global plastic treaty, we're not going to be able to make the steps that we need to take for all the reasons that we know, whether it's for the ocean's health or if not for our own health, then for the health of our children and grandchildren. So a global treaty is absolutely essential. If we don't get to a global treaty, the burden being placed on countries, especially in the global south, who actually have very little to do with the plastic pollution, is beyond what I think they can carry. And so making sure that we bring all the countries on board is important. So let me start with that. However, I think we also all feel that 2024 is such an important year when it comes to negotiations, and we're not at a good place. And so from our perspective, we need to think really smartly and sharply about how do we use the next negotiations to keep a very practical approach, knowing that if we wait for a treaty that will be a consensus treaty that will engage all the countries, and it's going to be a watered down and vague treaty. I think that's unfortunately the stage we have reached. So I think looking back at the other negotiations that we've been involved in, the good treaties start with a coalition of the willing, number one, and starting with the countries that really want to make a difference. And there's so many. In fact, it's a small group of countries that are not willing to make progress on a global plastics treaty. So let's make sure that those countries and governments and leaders that are taking the steps towards a success, hopefully by the end of 2024, that we stay united, that we stay strong, but also that we raise our voices and that we say that it's unacceptable for those countries who are lagging behind, who are trying to block the treaty, that we disagree with that. And so, again, keeping it practical over the next time period, working with a coalition of the willing, I think is, at this moment, what we need to do. But would love to hear from others, including you, Inger. I know you're heavily involved in this.
I think that's terrific. I wonder if we have a little bit of time now, we could take a couple questions from the audience. Otherwise, I can pepper our panel with more questions. We have one here, and then I'll come to you.
Well, I have more of a comment rather than question. I have been in the plastic recycling business for 35 years, so I have spoiled my hands in 60 countries. Kirsten talked about consensus. I think the biggest issue in this plastic is realization that commercial interests of all the stakeholders are contradictory. I collect a lot of paper waste. Every ton of paper waste I collect, it's good for the paper industry. I collect a lot of steel waste. Every ton of steel is good for the steel industry. Every ton of plastic I collect, it's not good commercially for the oil industry, for the petrochemical industry. So that's the background. Second thing, if you ask me in the middle of night, we collect in 60 countries 400,000 tons of plastic waste. If you ask me in the middle of night, what's the issue? The issue is the enormity of the ignorance. People are not aware about the seriousness of the problem. That every day we generate 1 million tons. This is going to be 3 million tons every day. Less than 10% is recycled. And the worst part, and this is the point I want to raise here, I talked to a leading mechanical recycling manufacturers who is based in Austria. And I asked them that if I'm able to get a blank check from World Bank, how much capacity they can add in 1 year for mechanical recycling machineries. I come back to the point, we generate 350 million tons, 4% incremental growth, so about 14 million tons every year, new plastic generation. The figure he came out he can add only 1.5 million tons of plastic manufacturing, mechanical recycling capacity. 1.5 million tons. So we made a calculation. The most they can do is 14 million tons. So that just covers the incremental. What happens to the 90%? Chemical recycling, we keep on talking. So this is the biggest issue. That people are not aware that the problem is so serious. I think somehow we have kept it under the carpet. So this is the issue we need to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I quickly take the other question, and then I ask the... Did you all want to first, sorry, but wait 1 second, and respond to the...
No, it's okay.
No,
Okay,
take a few
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Thank
then I'll wait. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Nicholas. I'm a global shaper from the Dar es Salaam Hub, part of the World Economic Forum Foundations. I have a question, but I also want to share our experience for what has worked. So plastic is a huge issue in Tanzania, especially around the coastline, where most of the plastic waste ends into the Indian Ocean. We have utilized the model that has worked, where we have established plastic banks in our communities, integrated innovation, where we conduct hackathons to help recycle and upcycle them, but also commercialize them to make them businesses. So we have innovators that make plastic bags out of cement bags that help people go to school, plastic furniture, and all that. I understand that's a little part of what young people could do, right? And I'm here to raise that voice. But I'm also here to hear from your expectations, right? In order to reach the plastic treaty, probably one of the words that we have heard for a very long time, the time is almost over. So what expectations do you have for young people to take action to make sure that we facilitate the implementation of the treaty? Thank you. So really want to hear from your end as well.
So,
Happy to answer.
you want to, Jean d'Arc, you want to start us, and then I come to you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have to, I'm responding to the gentleman from Dar es Salaam. As I said, we are not against plastic. We are against plastic waste in nature. For example, in Rwanda, we have now 10 small and medium industry from the youth to recycle the collected plastic waste for transforming it into construction materials. We have one young lady who is collecting plastic bottles, and she's transforming those plastic bottles into construction materials with the sand. She's making bricks to construct roads, to construct buildings, small playground for children in schools. We need the involvement of youth to understand that this is a crucial problem that needs really the force and the strength of our youth, the strength of everybody. We cannot talk about a global problem and use local solution. We need a global solution for the global problem. I thank you.
Thank you.
I think when listening to both, there is rightly so, there is so much emphasis on the recyclability part, and don't get me wrong, that is super important. But I think when you look at the treaty and where we are, I think as a coalition, and I think we need to focus more on two other things to get to solve for the problem of recyclability and the things that you talked about. I think it's about design standards,
yes,
to eliminate, to reduce, to progress on refill, because changing consumer habits, as I know, from a consumer perspective, is the hardest thing to do. And I was sort of taken aback. Last week I was in India, and the refill, for example, the refilling of basic consumer products such as washing powder or liquids and so forth was way ahead of the refilling that we do in Europe. And why is that? Because people in Europe have more capacity and affordability to buy, to continue to buy. this is not going to solve, I mean, changing a consumer habit in Europe with the buying power that consumers have, I face a huge challenge. Even though I would love to work with retailers on it, we do it, but it's hard to solve. We need INC to come together and to design guidelines for this, to talk more about the standards at the beginning rather than only at the recyclability part. The second thing I would like to focus on is on extended producer responsibility, because the financing of this transition is hugely important, and it will get lost into many other priorities that, of course, governments and everybody has. We do need to make sure that we ring fence this particular problem, because you called it out as one of the biggest problems. As I said, I agree. I'm very passionate about it. But if we want to solve it, it cannot be part of something else that we're all paying attention to. It's the producers. There will be a bit of pain.
Yes.
And as Unilever, we are accepting that if it's a level playing field and if the funds are effectively used to resolve the problem. So those would be my two answers. That doesn't, look, we have one goal, we have a few goals. One of them is to collect more plastic than we make. And in India, we reached 100% of that. Okay, I'm happy with that statistic. But that's not attacking the heart of that's not attacking the root cause.
Yeah.
It's dealing with the consequences.
Yeah.
No, very good and excellent getting at this point that actually to solve this problem, we have to go back and be getting involved. And I mean, design being one of the many things in the design.
And regulation around usage.
Exactly.
I think that is a called opportunity.
Yeah. No, in terms of getting consumers eventually there, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sheila, if I may, just two additional small comments based on what you said. I think two things. Number one, the nice thing about plastic, as with most things when it relates to the environment, is there's so much you can already do, right? So I think we're talking about a global treaty, but this is definitely something that engages everybody. So I think that's the first thing. And I think with, like many other organizations, one of the big things we're doing is engaging with cities and making sure that we create plastic-free cities, because a lot of the waste from plastics comes from some of the biggest cities. So the global treaty is not going to solve everything, but I think it's absolutely essential as we also work at other levels and as consumers. And the second thing I just wanted to say is also, because of our engagement with whether it was the EU deforestation law or the GBF, it's not just, there's a lot of movement necessary bottom up. And it's not just the big corporate CEOs, and your leadership in this of Unilever and other organizations is absolutely essential. But it's also the public, and it's especially the voices of youth. So I actually want to ask you, together with others, join forces with others and with us to let the voices of the youth be heard, because it is about, I know everybody says this, but especially plastic is so much about your health and your future. And I think finding ways to mobilize the general public towards this global treaty, as we've done in other treaties, will be important this year. So let's find ways to keep doing that.
I think that's really important, because I do think one of the things that's important for governments to understand is if business is behind something, if they feel consumers are behind something, it gives them the confidence to move forward with regulation, right? If they feel like, oh, this is something business doesn't want or consumers don't care about this, but it gives them that confidence. It's very difficult, because it's very difficult to set ambitious regulation, right? So I completely agree with you. I think really important. I know we are running a little bit tight on time, so I think we're going to move to our closing speech, and I'm going to invite Inger Andersen up. So thank you very much to our really prestigious and terrific panel.
Thank you.
Inga, welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to stand because
then
I can speak better. And I want to say, first of all, do you remember when INC 3 closed? It was the 19th of November. I just want you to sort of check in. So no, it is most definitely not stalling. And no, we are absolutely running here. In between 19th of November and now, I'm sure some of you have celebrated Christmas and New Year's and all of that. My staff has to do that too. However, we've also translated the text into all 5 UN languages, and we issued it on the 3rd of December. So just saying. It took us literally 2 weeks to issue this text. Yes, it is 77 pages long. Welcome to the world of negotiations with 193 member states. This is how it works. Do not get downhearted about that. That's the nature of the beast, right? Country X, 193 of them, will say we need this, and country Y will say, and we dutifully reflect it all. And so you will also hear, oh, but there are gazillions of brackets. Of course there are, because everything people put in is with brackets. That's the nature of the beast. This will be the 19th treaty that we will create. We are very, very adept at this. Climate change, made in UNEP. Biodiversity, made in UNEP. Basel Convention, Minamata, you name it, Stockholm, 17 of them. I don't need to go through them all. The point here, Montreal Protocol, of course, Vienna Convention, etc. It's hard slog. Welcome. We need you. We need those voices from industry, from private sector, from indigenous people, from waste pickers, and from NGOs, whether they are nature or human rights or child rights, etc. All of the above are needed. Yes, is it complicated to get into the General Assembly of the United Nations and have a voice? Yes, that's the nature of the beast. Join us, nevertheless. That's the only way we can make this happen. So the treaty's out, the text, and I invite you to read it, and some of you will have read it, I'm sure. There you go. So what is it that we need to do? We need to eliminate that which is short-lived and unnecessary. I think Jeanne d'Arc, minister, spoke brilliantly about this, so did others, but it is absolutely clear. The unnecessary, the short-lived, that which can be replaced by something else, obviously, eliminate it. And that should lead to a reduction of that which ends up in the environment. But last I checked, we also want windmills and e-vehicles and lighter planes. And lighter planes are often made of things that are plastic. So let's just be careful exactly how we frame this. Reduce that which goes into the environment. And that may mean something about raw polymer, but let's understand that there's other stuff that is on our collective to-do list, which we absolutely want to see. And someone else that is cleverer than me needs to sit down and calculate whether that translates into raw polymer actually reduction or not, because I want to see those windmills swinging and the planes going with lighter and less fuel consumption, just like you do. So let's be clear, but reduction on that which goes directly into packaging, of course, because once we have EPR, which is what we need to have, then once there are credible, enabled across the world take-back schemes, all of a sudden then, and once you have a legislation about what you can do or not do with waste, well, then all of a sudden recycled polymer becomes a valuable commodity. Right now, the brands are chasing this stuff. I see that Coke and Pepsi are here in the room, as well as obviously Unilever and others. They have set ambitious targets, but they can't get the stuff because we do not have a treaty, right? So eliminate, reduce. I've discussed that. Redesign, and there is some amazing innovation going on, because does it really have to be liquid? Let's have a conversation about that. I will take the obvious one, washing powder. I'm old enough to remember it was washing powder. And then at some point we added enzymes. That was, by the way, very clever. And then we ended up that it was more compact, still powder. And then we thought, no, we have to have it liquid. So we made it liquid. Then we made concentrate liquid, and then there was less of it, and half a cup instead of a full cup. You've all been on this journey. But now you see amazing innovation where this product is just a compressed piece. It looks like a thick piece of paper, 1/4 of the size of my iPad. You put it in, and there's so many. I mean, this is just one example, but you see these everywhere. So the redesign of that which today we envelope in plastic. And I think that's super exciting and very interesting. And you know, there are soft drink companies present here that today market, you know, your drink with a little thing that you drop in your container, and you have your sports drink with the electrolytes, but there was no plastic bottle involved. That kind of innovation is what we need to see much more of. and switching to non-plastic substitutes, obviously, for that which today is plastic. And that goes from so many things. If you have ever gone to an unengineered landfill, you will see where it's just dumping. You will see that most of it is this useless, single-use stuff that will live for thousands of years. And when it breaks down, it'll break down in goodness knows what kind of polymers and so on. And then, of course, strengthen the whole, and you mentioned that very much. So the reduce, reuse, refill, and repair and recycling. And that will mean some ambitious targets. This is not, if I have anything to do with it, a framework treaty where we just agree, let's just meet every 5 years, we add it all up, we do a nice stretch, and every 5 years we stretch some more. That's not what this is about. Most of the other treaties that UNEP has under its belt and that we are hosting and enabling are regulatory in nature. Montreal Protocol, phasing out HCFCs, CFCs, etc. CITES, can you trade rhino horn? No, you actually can't. Can you trade rosewood? Sometimes, but you need a permit from us, essentially, and so on and so forth. Can you trade this parrot? Maybe, maybe not, etc. It depends on how it's listed. That's a regulatory thing. Minamata, we are phasing out, and that's why light bulbs, your dental amalgam, doesn't have mercury in it anymore, because it has a regulatory dimension. So we know how to do this. This is not hard. We just need to understand that it will take a number of dimensions. So yes, ambitious targets associated with the timeline. It was only in September that we gavelled the global chemical framework. It took us 10 years to get there, but I was very impatient to finally get it when I came on board. Now we have a regulatory framework around chemicals. It has been gavelled. We're going to phase out a number of chemicals by 2030 and 2035. The world hasn't really been paying attention to this, but it is a huge issue. And it is an issue that walks into the plastic discussion because of the chemicals of concern, which will clearly have to be a dimension and a part of the negotiations, polymers of concern. Because the primary plastic polymers and the chemicals of concern are an issue. The legacy story is something that I just want to touch base on. There are nations who are nearly entirely dependent on tourism or on their beaches for one thing or the other, on fisheries, and they are going to be receiving, the day we have turned ministers tap off, these countries, these nations, largely island and coastal nations, largely poor, will have this plastic wash up on their shores for 10, 20, 30 years. There's a legacy dimension there that the world needs to own. And finally, I want to push back on a point that was made, that this is largely a global north problem, not made in the global south. I'm sorry. Join me in understanding that the plastics sector is global, and you can't point north and south. I travel all over the world. Check out how many plastic producers there are in many countries. So it is a jobs dimension. And it's not just India and Argentina and, bigger middle income. No, it is Mali and it is Sudan and it is, they are making flimsy plastic bag, and so on and so forth. And these jobs depends, and that depends, people are depending on them for their economies. So in making this transition, just like climate, we have to think about how can we make it fair and just and inclusive. And that's part of the conversation. But be mindful that those whom you may see throwing spanners in the work, some of them, yes, to protect domestic oil the fossil fuel industry, yes, okay, fine. But others, because it is a jobs dimension. And when we see some countries that stood up at INC3 and joined Iran in the, what did they call themselves? The aligned, or something. They had some like-minded or whatever. Some of them, they were there for a jobs dimension because they are not producing the new raw polymer. They import it and then they produce whatever they produce. And we want them all included as best we can, but that cannot be on the basis of a compromise of ambition. And I think that's one point that was made by one of the speakers, and I completely agree with it. Would we like to have everyone there? Absolutely. but we will see there are different views. This is very much a treaty that has been born out of the global south. Minister, as well as Peru, Rwanda and Peru are the two countries that have been pushing on this. And when I travel in the global south, there is an absolute determination to get this treaty and to land it, but to land it in a way that works. And so part of what is also in this treaty, because it is a whole life cycle treaty, not just a waste management treaty, which some would like it to do, but we don't need a treaty for waste management. It's like, do we need a treaty to have a fire brigade? No. We just have to have waste management infrastructure. But the truth is also that countries are significantly underinvested in waste management infrastructure. And the truth is also that poor people, there's very low willingness to pay for collection. Because if I am living in a slum, I am not going to use money to pay for somebody to collect. I'm going to dump and I'm going to burn open. And so would you. Because so then how will you find the kind of cross subsidies for things that people are willing to pay for to ensure that waste can be collected? This is part of the softer conversation, not part of the treaty, but part of something I ask you all to own. Because waste management is a municipal issue, but it is a very difficult issue to fund. So the text is out 2 weeks after. There is no lull. And yes, was it difficult? Yes, because there was some, we don't want an intersessional. So instead, and it was like a storm in a teacup. Before we had the INC3, we had lots of sessions. They were just not called intersessional. And we will have lots of information sessions also now. The next round will be in Ottawa. And so for some of the companies that are North America based, it will be easier to get to, and we very much encourage that we continue to have these dialogues. I really appreciate that the WEF is putting this on. I very much appreciate other fora where I've had this opportunity. I very much appreciate that WWF and others were sort of the instigator of the Business High Ambition Coalition. That voice will be needed to continue because we can only do this if we do it together. But bottom line, ambitious, time-bound rules, time-bound and specific targets, mandatory reporting, and means of implementation finance. Now, the finance will not have to be the Green Climate Fund. Again, we're in this business, so let's just be aware of what it is we're talking about. Once you set the regulatory setting, private sector kind of locks in, and some have locked in before the regulatory setting was even in place, which we obviously salute. But what we do want to see is that there will be, and the text will have to encompass that, and the UNEA resolution said so, there has to be means of implementation, some degree of financing. Look, the Montreal Protocol, we've been implementing that and phasing out ozone-depleting substances now for well over 30 years. And we have had $4 billion over 30-some years. Not a lot of money when you think of it. And that has been from public sources. And whilst I'm not finalizing and so on what monies will be needed, but I do think that it's not the hundreds and hundreds of billions that we are talking about. It is more modest money to help business and to help national governments setting in place the regulatory setting that can echo those of the plastic treaty, which we shall finish, God willing, at the end of 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I apologize, we're slightly running over, but I'd just like to end by saying that we really need governments to seize the opportunity to really get to an ambitious treaty. And I wanted to summarize, the Business Coalition has put together some briefs for the INC. And I'll just quickly say, and I think Inger touched on them between that and between what Heine said, 5 areas. The first is identification of chemicals and polymers of concern and problematic and avoidable products. And I know that Inger mentioned that, but that's one of the key things. Another, what Heine mentioned, was the product design and performance, so thinking about design. Another key thing is reuse policies. And then also mentioned a couple times extended producer responsibility, which is part of funding the that Inga touched on at the end, and then finally waste management. So those 5 things is what we're looking for. The Business Coalition has put together some briefings on that. And I'll just say to end that there's no time to waste. We need to agree on the treaty position, and we need to ensure that the treaty is ambitious and allows for the gradual and future expansion of regulation. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your Davos.